When I walked into that courtroom and saw my own daughter laughing while my son-in-law stared at the floor like a guilty dog, I knew my worst nightmare had become reality. The woman I had raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for was about to testify against me in a trial that could destroy what little I had left. But what she didn't know was that I had evidence that would expose every lie she'd built her new life upon. My name is Margaret Foster, and I'm 62 years old. I spent 37 years working as a nurse at Boston General Hospital, raising my daughter Emily as a single mother after my husband died in a construction accident when she was only 3. I gave that girl everything I had. I worked double shifts, missed sleep, skipped meals, all to make sure she had opportunities I never did. I put her through college, helped with her wedding, and even co-signed on her first house with her husband Derek. That house, that beautiful colonial in Newton with the white picket fence and the maple tree in the yard, became the center of everything that would eventually tear us apart. If you're connecting with this story, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. We're working toward our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world. Just click that red button and join our community. Emily had always been ambitious, even as a child. While other kids played with dolls, she played business, setting up pretend offices and bossing around her stuffed animals like employees. I was proud of that drive. I thought it meant she'd never struggle the way I had. She graduated with honors from Boston University with a degree in business administration, and within 5 years of entering the corporate world, she was making more money than I'd ever seen in my life. She met Derek at a company retreat, one of those weekend team-building things at a resort in the Berkshires. He worked in finance, came from money, had that polished look that screamed private schools and country clubs. I'll admit, I had reservations. Not because he wasn't nice, he was always perfectly polite, but because there was something cold behind his smile, something calculating in the way he looked at Emily, like she was an asset to be acquired rather than a person to be loved. They got married in the fall of 2019, a lavish affair at a vineyard in western Massachusetts that cost more than I'd spent on everything in my entire life combined. Emily insisted on paying for most of it herself, but I contributed what I could. I wanted her to have her dream wedding, even if it meant draining my modest savings account. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give them that. Emily looked stunning in her designer gown, and Derek looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. But during the vows, when they were supposed to be looking at each other with love and devotion, I caught Derek glancing at his watch. Just for a second. But I saw it, and something in my gut twisted with unease. The first year of their marriage seemed fine from the outside. They bought that house in Newton, a gorgeous 4-bedroom colonial that cost nearly $1 million. Emily was climbing the corporate ladder at a tech startup in Cambridge, and Derek was managing investment portfolios for wealthy clients in downtown Boston. They hosted dinner parties, took vacations to Europe, and posted endless photos on social media of their perfect life. But whenever I visited, I noticed little things. The way Derek would interrupt Emily mid-sentence, the way he'd correct her in front of guests, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. When I tried to ask her about it, she'd brush me off, insisting everything was wonderful, that I was imagining things, that I needed to stop being so overprotective. Then came March 2020, and everything changed. The pandemic hit Boston like a freight train. The hospital where I'd worked for decades became a war zone. We were overwhelmed, understaffed, terrified. I watched colleagues get sick, some die. I worked 16-hour shifts in full protective gear, sweating, exhausted, watching people gasp for breath through plastic barriers. Emily and Derek, meanwhile, transitioned seamlessly to working from home in their comfortable Newton house, ordering grocery deliveries and complaining about being bored. The disconnect was staggering. When I called Emily, desperate for some emotional support after particularly brutal shifts, she'd talk about her sourdough starter or the new home gym equipment Derek had ordered. It was like we were living on different planets. Your subscription really helps this channel grow. If you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to click subscribe. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and you can be part of that milestone. By the summer of 2020, I was exhausted beyond anything I'd ever experienced. The relentless stress of the pandemic, combined with the emotional toll of being largely ignored by my daughter during the worst crisis of my life, had worn me down to nothing. That's when I made the mistake that would eventually lead me to that courtroom. I had some savings left. Not much. Maybe $20,000 that I'd managed to squirrel away over the years for retirement. Emily called me one evening in July, sounding panicked. She explained that Derek's company was having cash flow problems due to the pandemic, that several of his major clients had pulled their investments, and that they were at risk of defaulting on their mortgage. She said if they lost the house, it would destroy Derek's reputation in the finance world, potentially end his career. She begged me to loan them money to cover the next few mortgage payments until things stabilized. I should have said no. I should have protected myself. But she was my daughter, my only child, and she sounded genuinely desperate. I transferred $15,000 to her account, keeping just $5,000 for emergencies. She promised to pay me back within 6 months, said she'd have it in writing, make it official. But the written agreement never materialized. Whenever I brought it up, she'd say she'd get to it, that she was swamped with work, that there was no rush because of course she'd pay me back. I was her mother. Didn't I trust her? The months passed. 6 months became 8, became 10, became a year. I never saw a penny of that money. Worse, Emily's calls became less frequent. Our relationship, which had already been strained, deteriorated further. When I did manage to reach her, she was short with me, irritated like I was an inconvenience. I tried to be understanding. The pandemic was hard on everyone, I told myself. She was stressed with work. She and Derek were probably struggling more than they let on. But then I saw the social media posts. The renovation they did on their kitchen, complete with marble countertops and custom cabinetry that must have cost $40,000. The new Audi Derek was driving. The weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard. They weren't struggling. They were thriving. And they'd done it with my retirement money. By the spring of 2021, as vaccines rolled out and life started returning to some semblance of normal, I was in a desperate situation. I'd been forced to cut my hours at the hospital due to chronic fatigue and health issues related to my pandemic work. My income had dropped significantly. I had medical bills piling up. I needed that money back, or at least some of it. I called Emily and asked, as gently as I could, if she could start paying me back. Her response was cold. She said I was being selfish, that they'd needed the money more than I did, that I was retired anyway, so what did I need $15,000 for? I tried to explain that I wasn't fully retired, that I had bills, that I'd given her nearly all my savings. She hung up on me. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Your support is crucial as we work toward 1,000 subscribers. It takes just a second to click, and it helps more than you know. That's when I made the decision to take legal action. I didn't want to sue my own daughter. The thought made me physically ill, but I didn't see any other option. I consulted with a lawyer, a kind man named Robert Chen, who had a small practice in Dorchester. He reviewed the bank transfer records, the text messages where Emily acknowledged the loan and promised to repay it, and the call logs showing my repeated attempts to discuss repayment. He said I had a solid case for recovery of the loan, that even without a formal written agreement, the electronic trail was sufficient evidence. He agreed to take the case on a partial contingency basis, since my funds were limited. I sent Emily a formal demand letter through Robert, giving her 30 days to either repay the loan or negotiate a payment plan. She didn't respond to the letter. Instead, she called me at 2 a.m, screaming that I was a terrible mother, that I'd always been controlling and manipulative, that she couldn't believe I'd threatened to sue her over money. I tried to reason with her, tried to explain that I wasn't threatening. I was simply asking for what was rightfully mine, what I'd worked decades to save. She told me I was dead to her and hung up. That was the last time we spoke before the lawsuit was filed. The legal process was slow and agonizing. Months of paperwork, depositions, mediation attempts that went nowhere because Emily and Derek refused to negotiate. Their lawyer, an expensive attorney from a prestigious Boston firm, tried every tactic to delay and complicate the case. They claimed the money was a gift, not a loan. They produced no evidence to support this claim, but they made it anyway. They tried to argue that I had plenty of money and was only suing out of spite. They dug into my finances, my work history, trying to find anything they could use against me. It was invasive, humiliating, and heartbreaking. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose dreams I'd nurtured, and she was treating me like an enemy. The trial was scheduled for October 2023, nearly 2 years after I'd first filed the lawsuit. As the date approached, I felt physically ill. I barely slept. I lost weight. My friends from the hospital tried to support me, but I was embarrassed to tell most of them what was happening. How do you explain that you're suing your own child? That the relationship you treasured above all else had disintegrated so completely? I felt like I'd failed as a mother, even though rationally I knew I'd done nothing wrong. I'd simply asked for my money back. But the guilt was overwhelming. The morning of the trial, I woke at 4 a.m., unable to sleep. October in Boston can be beautiful, with the leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold. But that morning was gray and cold, a persistent drizzle making the streets slick and miserable. I put on my best outfit, a navy blue suit I'd bought specifically for court appearances, though it hung loose on my frame from all the weight I'd lost. Robert picked me up at 7:30, and we drove through the morning traffic to the Suffolk County Courthouse, an imposing building downtown that suddenly seemed designed to intimidate. If this story is resonating with you, please subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here, working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your click makes a real difference. Hit that red subscribe button and join us. Walking into that courthouse felt surreal, like I was watching myself in a movie, like this couldn't possibly be my life. The marble floors echoed with footsteps, lawyers and plaintiffs and defendants all moving through the halls with grim determination. Robert guided me through security, through the maze of corridors, to the courtroom where our case would be heard. We were early, so we sat on a bench outside, reviewing the key points of my testimony. Robert was calm, reassuring, telling me to just tell the truth, to be clear about the loan, about the promises Emily had made, about my current financial situation. He said we had a strong case, that the judge would see through the defense's arguments, but I couldn't shake the dread that had settled in my chest like a stone. Then they arrived. Emily and Derek, walking down the corridor with their lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than I made in a month. Derek was in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking every inch the successful finance professional. And Emily. My daughter looked stunning, dressed in a designer dress and heels, her hair professionally styled, her makeup flawless. She looked confident, powerful, completely at ease. And when she saw me sitting there on that bench, when our eyes met for the first time in nearly 2 years, she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation, but a genuine contemptuous laugh, like I was the punchline to a joke only she understood. Derek wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, on the walls, on his lawyer, anywhere but at me. His jaw was tight, his shoulders tense. He looked guilty, but not remorseful. Guilty like someone who'd been caught, not like someone who regretted their actions. They walked past us without a word and disappeared into the courtroom. That laugh echoed in my head as we entered the courtroom minutes later. The room was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate, which somehow made it worse. There was no jury, just a judge, a stern-looking woman in her 50s named Judge Patricia Morrison, who had a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. Emily and Derek sat at the defense table with their lawyer, and Robert and I took our positions at the plaintiff's table. The distance between us was maybe 20 feet, but it felt like miles. The trial began with opening statements. Robert laid out our case clearly and simply. I had loaned my daughter $15,000 during the pandemic to help her avoid foreclosure. She had acknowledged it was a loan and had promised to repay it. She had not repaid a single penny, despite having the financial means to do so. We were seeking the return of the loan plus interest and legal fees. It was straightforward, factual, unemotional. Their lawyer's opening statement was a different story. She painted me as a controlling, manipulative mother who had always used money to exert power over Emily, who had given the money as a gift and was now claiming it was a loan out of spite because Emily had established appropriate boundaries. It was complete fiction, but she delivered it with such confidence that for a moment, I wondered if anyone would believe her. Take a moment to subscribe if you're invested in this story. Click that subscribe button and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your support truly matters. The prosecution called me to the stand first. I swore to tell the truth, sat down, and looked out at the courtroom. Emily was staring at me with cold eyes, no trace of the warmth that used to be there, no recognition of the bond we'd once shared. Robert questioned me gently, walking me through the chronology. My work as a nurse, raising Emily as a single mother, her wedding, the pandemic, the desperate call asking for money, the bank transfer, the broken promises to repay, my current financial situation. I spoke as clearly as I could, trying to keep my emotions in check. But my voice cracked when I talked about how hard I'd worked to save that money, how it represented years of sacrifice, how much it hurt to be treated this way by my own daughter. The cross-examination was brutal. Emily's lawyer attacked my credibility, my motives, my character. She implied I was lying about Emily promising to repay the loan. She suggested I'd given the money freely and was now having regret. She questioned why I hadn't gotten a written agreement if it was truly a loan. She pointed out that I'd helped Emily financially many times over the years without expecting repayment, implying this was no different. I tried to stay calm, to answer truthfully, but I felt myself getting flustered, defensive. Robert objected several times, and Judge Morrison sustained most of his objections, but the damage was done. I could see doubt creeping into the judge's expression. Robert introduced evidence next. The bank transfer showing the $15,000 payment. Text messages where Emily thanked me for the loan and promised to repay it within 6 months. Call logs showing my repeated attempts to discuss repayment. Screenshots of social media posts showing their expensive renovations and purchases during the time they claimed they couldn't afford to pay me back. It was damning evidence, clear and documented, and I saw their lawyer's confidence waver slightly as Robert methodically presented each piece. Then it was the defense's turn, and they called Emily to the stand. My daughter stood, smoothed her dress, and walked to the witness stand with her head high. She was sworn in and sat down, looking poised and self-assured. Her lawyer asked her to describe our relationship, and Emily launched into a prepared statement about how I'd always been overbearing, how I'd used financial support as a way to control her decisions, how she'd felt obligated to accept my help even when she didn't want it because I'd make her feel guilty if she refused. It was like listening to a stranger describe a relationship I'd never been part of. She talked about how difficult it had been to set boundaries with me, how I'd never respected her independence, how the money I'd given her was simply another attempt to maintain control over her life. Her lawyer asked if I'd ever explicitly stated the money was a loan. Emily said no, that I'd offered it as a gift to help during a difficult time, just like I'd given her money many times before. She said the text messages where she mentioned repaying me were just her being polite, trying to assuage what she knew was my need to feel needed, not actual acknowledgments of a debt. She said when I'd started demanding the money back, it had confirmed all her fears about my controlling behavior, that I'd only given the money to hold it over her head later. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every new subscriber helps us achieve that goal. Just click the subscribe button below. I sat there listening to my daughter lie under oath, and I felt something break inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about the complete destruction of our relationship, the erasure of decades of love and sacrifice, the rewriting of history to suit her narrative. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell the judge that none of this was true, that I'd never been controlling, that I'd always supported Emily's independence, that I'd given her everything I had without expecting anything in return, except basic respect and honesty. But I couldn't. I could only sit there, tears streaming down my face, while my daughter systematically destroyed my character and our past. Robert's cross-examination of Emily was aggressive. He pressed her on the specifics of the text messages, asking her to explain how thanking someone for a loan and promising to repay it within 6 months could be interpreted as anything other than an acknowledgement of debt. She stumbled, said she'd been under stress and hadn't chosen her words carefully. He asked about the expensive renovations and purchases they'd made while claiming they couldn't afford to repay me. She said those were necessary investments in their home and Derek's business image. He asked if she felt any moral obligation to repay her elderly mother, who'd sacrificed her retirement savings to help her. She said she felt no obligation to reward manipulative behavior with money. That answer, delivered with cold certainty, seemed to land poorly with Judge Morrison. I saw the judge's expression harden slightly. Derek was called to the stand next, and he was visibly uncomfortable. He confirmed their financial situation had been difficult during the early pandemic, but had stabilized by late 2020. He acknowledged they'd done renovations and made significant purchases in 2021 and 2022. When asked why they hadn't repaid me if they had the financial means, he said it was Emily's decision, that it was her mother and her family matter, and he'd deferred to her judgment. He was trying to distance himself, to avoid taking responsibility, and it showed. Robert asked him directly if he believed the money should be repaid. Derek hesitated, glanced at Emily, and said he thought the situation was complicated, and he didn't feel comfortable making that judgment. It was a coward's answer, and I think everyone in the courtroom knew it. The trial lasted 2 days. After all the testimony and evidence had been presented, both lawyers made their closing arguments. Robert emphasized the clear documentary evidence that this was a loan, not a gift, and that Emily had both the moral and legal obligation to repay it. The defense lawyer argued that the nature of mother-daughter relationships was complex, that financial exchanges within families often carried emotional baggage that couldn't be reduced to simple contractual terms, and that I had failed to prove beyond the civil standard of preponderance of evidence that this was a legally enforceable loan rather than a gift. Judge Morrison said she would review all the evidence and issue her ruling within 2 weeks. If you've followed this story this far, please consider subscribing. We're building something special here, a community of people who appreciate authentic stories. Help us get to 1,000 subscribers by clicking that subscribe button. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I barely left my apartment, a small 1-bedroom in Roxbury that suddenly felt like a prison. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except waiting for the ruling. Robert called me every few days with reassurance, saying he felt confident based on the judge's reactions during the trial, but I couldn't allow myself to hope. I'd already lost my daughter. If I lost the case too, I'd have nothing left. The ruling came on a Thursday morning in early November. Robert called me at 9 a.m. and told me to meet him at his office at noon. He wouldn't tell me the outcome over the phone, which I took as a bad sign. I spent those 3 hours convinced I'd lost, convinced the judge had believed Emily's lies, convinced I would have to live with the injustice for the rest of my life. When I arrived at Robert's office, he was smiling. That's when I knew. Judge Morrison had ruled in my favor. She'd issued a detailed written opinion that methodically dismantled the defense's arguments. She noted that the text messages constituted clear acknowledgement of a loan agreement. She observed that the lack of a formal written contract did not invalidate the loan given the documented electronic communications. She stated that Emily's testimony about her mother's allegedly controlling behavior was not relevant to the legal question of whether a loan existed and had to be repaid. She found that the evidence showed I had transferred the money with the clear expectation and agreement that it would be repaid. She ordered Emily and Derek to repay the $15,000 plus 3 years of interest calculated at the legal rate, plus my legal fees, for a total judgment of $23,000. She gave them 60 days to pay in full. I sat in Robert's office and cried. Not tears of joy, though I was relieved. Tears of grief, because I'd won the case, but I'd lost my daughter. The money didn't matter anymore, not really. What mattered was that my own child had looked me in the eye and lied, had tried to paint me as a villain, had shown no remorse or love or even basic human decency. The legal victory felt hollow. Emily and Derek paid the judgment on the final day of the 60-day window. Robert confirmed the funds had been transferred to my account. There was no apology, no note, no acknowledgement beyond the bare minimum legal requirement. The money appeared in my account, and that was it. I haven't heard from Emily since the trial ended. She blocked my number, unfriended me on all social media, and made it clear she wants nothing to do with me. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she and Derek are still living in that Newton house, still posting their perfect life on social media, still pretending everything is wonderful. I'm just erased from the narrative, like I never existed. Before we wrap up, if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us continue sharing stories like this one. Click subscribe and be part of our community. The money from the judgment helped me stabilize my finances. I paid off my medical bills, replenished some of my retirement savings, and stopped living in constant anxiety about unexpected expenses. In purely practical terms, the lawsuit was successful. But the emotional cost was staggering. I spent months in therapy trying to process the loss of my relationship with Emily, trying to understand how we'd gotten to this point, trying to forgive myself for whatever mistakes I'd made as a mother that led to this outcome. My therapist kept reminding me that I'd done nothing wrong, that Emily's behavior was her choice, that I couldn't control or fix her. But the guilt and grief were overwhelming. I'm writing this now, more than a year after the trial, because I've finally reached a place where I can talk about it without completely falling apart. I want other parents who might be going through similar situations to know they're not alone. Family estrangement is more common than people think, and financial disputes between family members are one of the leading causes. If I could go back, would I have handled things differently? Maybe. Maybe I should have insisted on a written loan agreement from the start. Maybe I should have said no when Emily asked for the money. Maybe I should have recognized earlier that her relationship with Derek was changing her in ways that weren't healthy. But I can't go back. I can only move forward with the reality I have now. The hardest part is accepting that I may never have a relationship with my daughter again. She's made her choice, and I have to respect it, even though it breaks my heart. I still love her, despite everything. She's still the little girl I raised, the child I sacrificed everything for, even if she doesn't remember it that way. But I also have to love myself enough to recognize that what she did was wrong, that her treatment of me was cruel and unjustified, and that I deserve better. I won the court case, but I lost so much more. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. The money helped, certainly, but would I trade it to have my daughter back? Probably. But that's not an option. She made her choice, and I have to live with the consequences. I've tried to rebuild my life in other ways. I volunteer at a community health clinic, using my nursing skills to help people who can't afford regular health care. I've reconnected with old friends from the hospital, built a small but supportive social network. I've started going to a support group for parents of estranged adult children, where I've found others who understand the unique pain of this kind of loss. It helps to know I'm not alone, that other good parents have been inexplicably cut off by their children, that this epidemic of family estrangement is real and devastating, and not always the parent's fault. One more time, if you found value in this story, please hit that subscribe button. Your subscription brings us closer to our goal of 1,000 subscribers and allows us to keep sharing these important stories. Thank you for being here. Some days are better than others. Some days I wake up and feel like I'm moving forward, building a new life that doesn't center around the daughter who rejected me. Other days, I wake up and immediately start crying, overwhelmed by the loss, by the injustice, by the sheer cruelty of how Emily treated me. I've learned to be gentle with myself on those hard days, to let myself feel the grief without judgment. I've learned that healing isn't linear, that I'll probably carry this wound for the rest of my life, but that I can still find meaning and purpose, and even joy despite it. The legal system worked in my case. I had clear evidence, a good lawyer, and a fair judge, and I prevailed. But the legal victory didn't heal the emotional wound. It didn't restore my relationship with my daughter. It didn't give me back the trust and love we once shared. It simply gave me my money back and validated that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the villain Emily had tried to make me out to be. That validation matters. Don't get me wrong. It matters a lot. But it's not enough to fill the Emily-shaped hole in my heart. If you're a parent reading this, dealing with a difficult adult child, or contemplating legal action against a family member, I want you to know that there's no easy answer. Every situation is unique. Every family dynamic is different. For me, suing Emily was necessary because I genuinely needed that money to survive, and because she left me no other option. But I went into it knowing it would probably end our relationship forever, and I was right. You have to weigh those costs carefully. Is the money worth losing your child? In my case, I didn't really have a choice. Emily had already checked out of our relationship long before the lawsuit. But in other situations, the calculus might be different. And if you're an adult child who's cut off a parent, I want you to ask yourself if your parent really deserves that punishment. Have they truly been abusive and harmful? Or are they just imperfect humans who made mistakes while trying their best? Did they sacrifice for you, love you, support you, even if they sometimes did it imperfectly? Before you cut someone out of your life forever, especially a parent who gave you everything, really examine your motives. Are you protecting yourself from genuine harm, or are you running from uncomfortable emotions? Are you being honest about the past, or are you rewriting it to justify your present choices? These are hard questions, but they're worth asking. I look at photos of Emily as a child sometimes. Her first day of school, gap-toothed and excited. Her high school graduation, proud in her cap and gown. Her wedding day, radiant and hopeful. I try to reconcile those images with the cold stranger who laughed at me in that courthouse corridor. I try to understand how the sweet girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms became the woman who could lie under oath about our relationship. I don't have answers. People change, sometimes in ways we can't predict or control. Maybe Derek changed her. Maybe success changed her. Maybe I never really knew her as well as I thought I did. Whatever the reason, the Emily I knew is gone, and the woman who remains is a stranger to me. The final thing I want to say is this. Money isn't worth more than relationships, but sometimes standing up for yourself is worth more than maintaining a toxic relationship. I didn't sue Emily to get rich or to punish her. I sued her because she stole from me, lied to me, and treated me with contempt. And I deserved better. I sued her because I needed that money to survive, and she had both the means and the moral obligation to repay it. I sued her because sometimes love has to include boundaries, and my boundary was that I wouldn't be financially exploited even by my own daughter. That doesn't make me a bad mother. It makes me a human being with dignity and self-respect. Would I want a relationship with Emily again if she apologized and tried to make amends? Honestly, I don't know. The wound is so deep now, the betrayal so complete, that I'm not sure anything could heal it. But I'd be willing to try, because she's still my daughter, and some part of me will always love her. The door on my end isn't locked, but I'm not holding my breath waiting for her to knock. I'm living my life, finding peace where I can, and accepting that some losses are permanent. To everyone who's listened to this whole story, thank you. Thank you for bearing witness to my pain, for understanding the complexity of what I've been through, for not judging me for taking my own daughter to court. It's not a story I'm proud of, but it's my story, and it's real. Family is complicated. Love is complicated. Money makes everything more complicated. Sometimes there are no good choices, only less bad ones. I made the choice I needed to make, and I'm learning to live with the consequences. That's all any of us can do. And one final time, if this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel. Click that red button and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means everything, and it helps us continue to share authentic, meaningful stories. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. Plus, I've been thinking a lot about what I could have done differently in the years leading up to the courtroom confrontation. The truth is, the signs were there long before Emily asked me for that money. Long before the pandemic gave her the excuse to show her true colors. I just didn't want to see them. Or maybe I saw them and convinced myself they didn't mean what I feared they meant. That's what parents do, isn't it? We make excuses for our children. We give them the benefit of the doubt. We believe the best about them even when the evidence suggests otherwise. I did that with Emily for years. And by the time I finally opened my eyes to who she'd become, it was too late to salvage anything. Looking back, I can pinpoint when things started to shift. It was subtle at first, so subtle I almost missed it. Around 2017, maybe 2 years before she met Derek, Emily started making comments about my lifestyle that felt judgmental. She'd visit my apartment and make little remarks about how small it was, how I should consider moving somewhere nicer, how I deserved better than living in Roxbury. At first, I thought she was being caring, concerned about my well-being. But there was an edge to her tone, a suggestion that there was something embarrassing about the way I lived. I'd worked my entire adult life as a nurse, a noble profession but not a lucrative one, and I lived within my means. My apartment was small but clean and comfortable. My neighborhood was diverse and full of life. I was happy there. But Emily's comments made me feel like I should be ashamed, like my modest lifestyle was somehow a reflection of failure, rather than simply a reflection of the choices I'd made and the hand I'd been dealt. When she started dating Derek, those comments intensified. She'd talk about the restaurants they went to, places with names I couldn't pronounce and prices that made my eyes water. She'd mention casually that Derek's apartment in Back Bay cost more per month in rent than I made in 2 months of work. She started dressing differently, carrying designer handbags that cost thousands of dollars, wearing jewelry that sparkled with what I assumed were real diamonds. I was happy she was doing well financially. I truly was. I'd always wanted her to have opportunities I never had, to live a comfortable life without the constant money stress that had defined my existence. But somewhere in that transformation from my down-to-earth daughter to this polished, wealthy woman, she started looking at me differently. Like I was an embarrassment. Like my working-class background was something to be hidden rather than honored. If you're still with me on this journey, I really appreciate your attention. Please take a second to subscribe to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your click helps us build this community. Just hit that red subscribe button. The wedding planning process was when the disconnect became impossible to ignore. Emily wanted everything to be perfect, which I understood. Every bride wants a beautiful wedding, but her version of perfect was so far removed from anything I could comprehend or afford. She'd show me pictures of venues that cost $50,000 just to rent for the day. She'd talk about importing flowers from Ecuador and hiring a celebrity wedding planner from New York. When I gently suggested that maybe some of these expenses were excessive, that the money could be better used as a down payment on a house or invested for their future, she'd get defensive. She'd say I didn't understand, that this was her one special day, that she and Derek wanted to start their marriage with a celebration that reflected their status and success. That word, status, stuck with me. Since when had my daughter cared about status? The girl I raised valued kindness, intelligence, hard work, not social standing or impressing wealthy people. I contributed $5,000 to the wedding, which was all I could afford without completely depleting my savings. Emily accepted it with a tight smile and a thanks that felt perfunctory. I later found out the total cost of the wedding was somewhere north of $150,000. My $5,000 was a drop in an ocean of excess. During the reception, as I sat at a table with some of Emily's childhood friends and their parents, people I'd known for years, I felt profoundly out of place. The other guests were Derek's colleagues and clients, people who wore their wealth like armor, who talked about their vacation homes and their investments and their children's private schools. I was just Margaret, the nurse from Roxbury, the single mother who'd worked double shifts to give her daughter a chance at this life. And sitting there, watching Emily and Derek dance their first dance to a song performed by a live band that probably cost more than my car, I felt a creeping sadness. I'd worked so hard to give Emily opportunities and she'd seized them. But in the process, she'd left me behind. Derek's influence on Emily cannot be overstated. Before she met him, my daughter was ambitious but grounded. She worked hard, but she also valued relationships and experiences over material things. She'd call me regularly just to chat, to tell me about her day, to ask for advice about work problems or friend drama. After Derek entered the picture, those calls became less frequent and more transactional. She'd call when she needed something, information or a favor, or my opinion on something specific. But the casual connection we'd always had started to evaporate. Derek came from old money, the kind of Boston family with a name that appeared on buildings and scholarship funds. His parents had a sprawling estate in Weston and another home on Nantucket. He'd gone to Phillips Exeter Academy and then Harvard, where his family name ensured his admission regardless of his actual qualifications. He'd never struggled, never wanted for anything, never had to make the kind of sacrifices that build character and empathy. I remember having dinner with Emily and Derek about 6 months into their relationship at a restaurant in the South End, one of those trendy places with exposed brick and a menu full of things I'd never heard of. Derek spent most of the meal talking about his work, dropping names of important clients and discussing investment strategies that went completely over my head. When I tried to contribute to the conversation by talking about something interesting that had happened at the hospital, a young patient I'd helped who'd been terrified of needles until I taught him a breathing technique, Derek listened with barely concealed boredom. Then he changed the subject back to finance. Emily, who would have once been genuinely interested in hearing about my work and my patients, just nodded along with Derek. Like my stories were trivial and unimportant compared to his tales of moving millions of dollars around for wealthy clients. Your subscription really matters to us. If you're enjoying this continuation of my story, please click that subscribe button. We're building toward 1,000 subscribers, and every single one helps. Thank you for your support. That dinner was a turning point for me, though I didn't fully realize it at the time. I went home feeling diminished, feeling like I'd somehow failed a test I didn't know I was taking. I started second-guessing myself whenever I was around Emily and Derek. I'd monitor my grammar, worried about sounding uneducated. I'd research topics I thought they might discuss so I could participate in conversations without seeming ignorant. I'd wear my nicest clothes when visiting them, even though my nicest clothes were still obviously cheap compared to what they wore. I was trying to bridge a gap that was widening by the day, trying to remain relevant in my daughter's increasingly elite world. And the more I tried, the more exhausting and demoralizing it became. When Emily told me they were buying the house in Newton, I was genuinely happy for them. Newton is a beautiful suburb, full of excellent schools and safe neighborhoods, and people who've achieved the American dream. I was proud that my daughter had worked hard enough to afford a home in such a desirable area. But when she invited me over to see it for the first time, I felt that familiar mixture of pride and sadness. The house was gorgeous. There was no denying it. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with appliances that probably cost more than everything in my apartment combined, hardwood floors throughout, a beautifully landscaped yard with that iconic maple tree. It was the kind of house I dreamed of owning when I was young, before my husband died, and I became a single mother fighting just to keep the bills paid. Emily showed me around with obvious pride, pointing out the crown molding and the original fireplaces, and the master bathroom with its soaking tub and separate shower. Derek mostly stayed in his home office during my visit, answering work emails and taking calls. When the tour was complete, Emily and I sat in the kitchen drinking tea, and I told her how proud I was of everything she'd accomplished. She thanked me, but there was a distance in her eyes, like she was already thinking about something else, someone else. I asked if she was happy, really happy, and she looked at me with surprise and said of course she was happy. She had everything she'd ever wanted. But I noticed she said everything, not everyone. She mentioned the house, the career, the lifestyle. But she didn't mention Derek. Didn't mention love or partnership or emotional fulfillment. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Or maybe I was seeing something she wasn't ready to admit yet. The pandemic changed everything for everyone, but it changed different things for different people. For me, it was a descent into hell. Working at Boston General during those early months was like being in a war zone. We were overwhelmed with patients, running out of supplies, watching people die alone because their families couldn't visit. The fear was constant. Every shift, I worried I'd bring the virus home, that I'd get sick, that I'd die alone in a hospital bed like so many patients I'd cared for. I was exhausted beyond anything I'd ever experienced, physically and emotionally depleted. Sleep was difficult because my mind wouldn't stop replaying the trauma of each shift. I'd close my eyes and see the faces of patients who hadn't made it, hear the sound of ventilators and alarms and grieving families on video calls saying goodbye. During those darkest months, I needed Emily more than I'd ever needed her. I needed to hear her voice, to be reminded that there was still love and connection and reason to keep going. I'd call her, desperate for some comfort, some acknowledgement of what I was going through. And she'd answer, but she was always distracted, always had something else going on. She'd let me talk for maybe 5 minutes before finding an excuse to get off the phone. She was busy with work, busy with a Zoom meeting, busy with a grocery delivery that had just arrived. She never asked how I was coping emotionally. She never offered support or encouragement or even basic empathy. It was like my trauma was an inconvenience, an uncomfortable reminder of unpleasant realities she'd rather not think about. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any future stories. We're working hard to hit 1,000 subscribers, and your support makes all the difference. Click that subscribe button now. Meanwhile, Emily and Derek were thriving in their comfortable Newton bubble. They'd converted one of their spare bedrooms into a home gym. They'd bought a Peloton bike and expensive weights and yoga mats. They were taking online cooking classes and making elaborate meals from scratch. They were watching the stock market and making savvy investments while prices were low. They were, by all accounts, having the time of their lives. And I was watching people die, holding the hands of strangers because their own families couldn't be there, coming home to my empty apartment and crying myself to sleep. The contrast was obscene. When Emily called in July 2020 asking for money, my initial reaction was disbelief. They were doing so well, so much better than I was. And yet they needed my help? She explained that Derek's income had become unpredictable, that several major clients had pulled their accounts due to market volatility and fear, that they were genuinely at risk of missing mortgage payments. She sounded scared, more vulnerable than she'd been in months, and that vulnerability reached something in me. This was my daughter, asking for help. Despite everything, despite the emotional distance and the dismissive treatment, she was still my child. And I was still her mother. So I said yes. I said I'd help. I didn't even hesitate, really, though I should have. The process of transferring the money felt surreal. I logged into my bank account, looked at my savings balance, $20,000 that represented decades of careful management and sacrifice, and I moved $15,000 of it into Emily's account. 75% of everything I had, gone in an instant. She'd promised to formalize the loan with paperwork, promised to pay me back within 6 months, promised this was temporary. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Because the alternative, that my daughter would take my money and disappear, was too painful to contemplate. The first few weeks after the transfer, Emily was actually warm again. She called to thank me multiple times, said I'd saved them, said she didn't know what they would have done without me. She promised she was working on the loan agreement, that she'd send it over soon for me to review. I felt good about my decision. I'd helped my daughter in her time of need, and our relationship seemed to be improving as a result. She was calling more often, asking about my work, seeming genuinely interested in my life again. I thought maybe the pandemic and the financial stress had made her realize what really mattered, that we only had each other, that family was more important than money or status. But by September, the warmth had faded. The calls became infrequent again. The promised loan agreement never materialized. When I brought it up, Emily would say she'd been busy, that she'd get to it, that there was no rush. By December, I started to worry. Not just about the money, though that was certainly a concern, but about the relationship. Emily was pulling away again, retreating back into her Newton life, and I was being left behind once more. I'd given her $15,000, and all I'd gotten in return was a few weeks of her pretending to care about me before reverting to indifference. If you've been following along with my story, and it's touching you in some way, please subscribe. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your click really does help. Hit that red subscribe button and join our community. When I saw the social media posts about their kitchen renovation in early 2021, I felt physically sick. The photos showed gleaming marble countertops, custom cabinetry with soft-close drawers, top-of-the-line stainless steel appliances, a farmhouse sink that probably cost $2,000 alone. The post had a caption about finally creating their dream kitchen, about investing in their home, about being grateful for the ability to improve their space. There were dozens of comments from friends congratulating them, calling the renovation beautiful, asking for contractor recommendations. I stared at those photos for a long time, doing the math in my head. That renovation had cost at least $40,000, probably more. They had $40,000 for a kitchen renovation but couldn't repay even a portion of the $15,000 they owed me. I called Emily that night, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. I said I'd seen the renovation photos and they looked beautiful, and I was happy they were doing so well financially, and did that mean they'd be able to start repaying the loan soon? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Emily said, in a tone that was pure ice, that the renovation had been planned for a long time, that it was an investment in their property value, and that I was being incredibly selfish to begrudge them improving their own home. I tried to explain that I wasn't begrudging them anything. I was simply asking for my money back as she'd promised. She said she didn't remember promising anything specific, that she'd said she'd pay me back when she could, and right now she couldn't. I pointed out that they'd just spent $40,000 on a kitchen. She said that was different. That was their money, not mine. And then she hung up on me. I sat in my apartment, holding my phone, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter had essentially told me that spending tens of thousands of dollars on cosmetic home improvements was more important than repaying a loan to her mother, who'd sacrificed her retirement savings to help during a supposed financial crisis. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. And it was in that moment I realized that this wasn't just about money. This was about respect, about value, about whether Emily saw me as a person deserving of basic decency or as an inconvenient obligation she could discard when it suited her. Over the following months, I tried several more times to discuss repayment, each time becoming more direct and firm about my need for the money. My health problems, likely stress-related, were mounting. I was having trouble sleeping, experiencing chest pains that scared me enough to see a cardiologist, dealing with anxiety that made simple tasks feel overwhelming. I'd had to reduce my hours at the hospital because I physically couldn't maintain the pace anymore. My income had dropped by almost 40%. I had medical bills piling up. I genuinely needed that money, not for luxuries or even comforts, but for survival. Basic bills, basic medical care, basic security. And Emily didn't care. Every conversation ended the same way, with her getting angry, accusing me of harassment, and hanging up. The decision to hire a lawyer felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. I knew that taking legal action against Emily would likely end our relationship permanently. But I also knew that I was out of options. She'd made it clear she had no intention of repaying me voluntarily. She'd made it clear that her lifestyle, her comfort, her wants were more important to her than her mother's needs. So I consulted with Robert Chen, and we began the process of building a case. It felt wrong in every way. It felt like an admission of failure as a mother. But it also felt necessary, like the only way to hold Emily accountable for her actions and reclaim what was rightfully mine. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We're building a community of people who value authentic storytelling, and we'd love for you to be part of it. Just click subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. The aftermath of the trial has been complicated. Yes, I got the money back, with interest and legal fees covered. Yes, I was vindicated by the judge's ruling. But what do you do with vindication when the cost is your relationship with your only child? How do you celebrate a legal victory when it confirms your worst fears about someone you loved unconditionally? I've struggled with those questions every day since the verdict. Some days I feel justified, righteous even, convinced I did the right thing. Other days I wonder if I should have just let it go, accepted the loss, maintained some connection with Emily, even if it meant being treated poorly. But then I remember her laugh in that courthouse corridor, and I know there was nothing left to maintain anyway. The thing about estrangement that people don't talk about is how it affects every aspect of your life. I can't watch movies about mothers and daughters without crying. I can't go to the grocery store without seeing things Emily used to love as a child and feeling a wave of grief. Holidays are torture. I spent last Thanksgiving alone in my apartment, heating up a frozen dinner, trying not to think about the Thanksgivings we'd shared, Emily helping me cook, laughing in the kitchen, making memories I thought would last forever. Christmas was even worse. I bought Emily a gift, a beautiful cashmere scarf I saw on sale, before I remembered that we don't speak anymore, that she's cut me out completely. I still have that scarf in my closet, tags still attached, a symbol of the relationship that no longer exists. But I'm learning to build a new life, slowly and painfully. I joined that support group for parents of estranged children, and it's been surprisingly helpful. Hearing other people's stories, realizing that I'm not alone in this nightmare, has provided some comfort. There's a woman in the group whose son hasn't spoken to her in 7 years because his wife convinced him his mother was toxic. There's a man whose daughter cut him off because he wouldn't give her a down payment on a house he couldn't afford. There's a couple whose adult children sided with their narcissistic sibling in a family dispute and now won't take their parents' calls. All of us are good people, loving parents who did our best, and we're all left wondering what we did wrong, how we ended up here. The group has taught me that sometimes you don't do anything wrong. Sometimes the child you raised becomes someone you don't recognize, and there's nothing you could have done to prevent it. That's a hard lesson to learn, but it's also oddly freeing. I raised her alone, sacrificed everything, and in that courtroom she had the audacity to laugh. But the judge saw through her lies and made her pay every penny back.